Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third session of our Growing Through Social Innovation webinar series. Today's discussion is going to focus on the power of numbers. We have a fantastic lineup of global speakers joining us again today. We're very excited for today's conversation. Before we get started, I'm going to go over a couple of quick housekeeping items. Please remember to keep your microphones muted throughout the presentation as we are recording and live captioning today's session. If you have any questions at all throughout the webinar, please drop them in the Q&A box down below, and we will answer them towards the end of the presentation. Now I'm pleased to turn it over to Dr. Serenity Wright, Senior Associate Director for Social Innovation at UK Innovate, who will be moderating today's panel. Over to you.
Thank you, Rohan. Thanks so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We are very excited to do this today. We had over 220 people register for this webinar, which I feel like is a strong indicator for the value added and the much needed conversation that we hope to have today. So we'll go on and jump right in. To my esteemed panel here, folks saw your bios on the website when they registered, but I would like for us to frame for everybody your background and experience for why measuring for impact is so important. And Stuart, I'll start with you actually. So if you'll just frame your background and experience in terms of why measuring impact is so important.
I think this is a wonderful topic. I think that introduction I'm going to try and do very briefly, but I've got to cover quite a number of bases. The first thing I should say is that I'm from Knowledge Exchange UK, which isn't related to UK Innovate. It's Knowledge Exchange United Kingdom. My background originally was in tech transfer, but in the UK system, the question about how does all type of research have an impact has been a very common one, which has led us in the direction of thinking not just about economic impact, but also about wider impacts from a whole variety of types of research, humanities and social sciences, but also how traditional tech transfer can have an impact in society too. So I think that's my introduction into why in the UK space, we're really concerned about thinking about impact broadly, not just economic impact, but social impact. And of course, in that kind of environment, measuring what you do and the success of what you do is really important. And so having numbers that allow you to show that impact is a really critical part of it. Now, of course, with economic numbers, it might be seen to be slightly easier than with social impact. And that's something I think we'll pick up on. I think the other provocative thing I'll say just as I wrap up is actually, although this session is talking about the power of numbers, and we'll spend a lot of time talking about that, the power of stories is equally important, particularly in the social impact space. And that mix of stories that really illustrate that impact, but grounded in a context of numbers is a really interesting space. So I say started in tech transfer, moved on to thinking about social enterprise and impact from a variety of forms of research. And my current role is in Knowledge Exchange UK, which is a membership organisation across the UK of organisations thinking about this topic of how to have an impact from research, how to partner with organisations that can benefit from research.
I was just frantically writing down your quote about power of numbers is important, but the power of stories is equally important. And I think we'll pick up a little bit on that today as well. But as we continue to tell our story, Judith, I'll turn it to you. Tell us your background and framing why measuring impact is so important.
First of all, Serenity, thanks for having me here. It's a wonderful chance to talk about my passion, I must admit. So my first contact with social innovation, I'm an economist and a researcher. And my first engagement with social innovation dates back actually to 2014, when we conducted a EU project on the economic foundation of social innovation. Since then, what we know about social innovation and how it emerges in the process has severely improved. Nevertheless, we have still a huge gap on robust data on social innovation and its impact. And especially when we think about innovation policies as they function today, being more mission-oriented, challenge-oriented, striving for transformative change, these numbers become even more important. And we have nothing at hand which actually supports evidence-based policy making in this vein. It's actually, for example, we have the community innovation survey for business innovation, but we do not have anything similar for social innovation, and we cannot just integrate a few indicators and then that's it, because social innovation is so broad with so many actors involved which are not covered by these studies. So from my perspective, I really love social innovation, and I will come back to that later, because I think we need to frame it a little bit different, at least when it comes to German, because I'm from Germany. So I would rather use the term societal innovation, because it's about the impact for society. And the social always seems like it's in the non-profit sector, which it isn't. So maybe this is for the moment.
Yeah, no, I think that is such a critical part of the story. The language and the rhetoric that we use around it changes how we even think about what we're measuring, right? And how we're even receiving the stories that we hear to try and communicate what we're seeing. And what we often say is, I know this to be true, but how, right? And that's what we're trying to help folks with today. So
Maybe if I
Catherine,
may,
yeah, please,
sorry.
please. Catherine, go ahead.
Hello, everyone, and a pleasure to be here, and thanks for the opportunity, Serenity. And like Judith, this is my passion, so I hope I don't get too excited during the webinar. But I will position the question in where I am now, where I've been, and where I hope to go. So currently, I'm a professor at Research Impact Assessment at the University of Calgary. And where I've come from, I spent 16 years in Alberta Innovates assessing both the research and innovation and the impact, and had the great opportunity there, starting out in health, in assessing impact as well as the measurement of it, but starting in health. And then because Alberta Innovates funded across numerous sectors, assessed environment, also assessed ag tech, also assessed innovation, commercialization, and with, I know my colleague here today, Dr. Karen Benzies, is working with her in terms of the social innovation. So kind of a long history and interest in really grappling the bear. Since I am located in Canada, I'll use some animal analogies. And I like Judith's point about the societal. So always balancing the economic and the societal in a holistic way is, from my communities of practice and profession, or where things are going. And where I'm going now with the with my new position is building out a lab. It's called Research Impact Assessment Lab, and REAL is the acronym, and that's really to signify how we can better realize real-world impact for and with our communities, which I think is relevant today. And then lastly, the big why, the uber why, I'll use a Peter Drucker quote, is you can't improve it if you can't measure it, or you can't measure it if you can't improve it. And I want to say that because I think ultimately in our discussion, we want to improve and optimize. And lastly, to pick up on Stuart's point in terms of a handy dandy tool, bringing in that evidence into an impact narrative is critical, so we value the relationships, the relational pathway as a way to go for societal impact. So thank you.
Catherine, I want to follow up with you on something on the quote you just used, can't measure if you can't improve, because I do think there's a chasing here, right? In terms of the method to improve, right? And often there's a hang up between being able to improve and having the money to improve, right? And we get caught on, well, I don't have the money, so I couldn't make it better, as opposed to, well, I didn't quite capture the right information or the right stories, and therefore we couldn't evolve the thing. So can we talk about funding for just a little bit from this perspective of, as we think about new innovations and new ventures, and you've got a strong background in this area, from a funding perspective specifically, whether from grant side or business side, why do we need to be focused on impact measurement specifically? And any tips or tricks for folks on how they can be shifting into this phase if they're not already there?
Yeah, so I'll talk from a funder's perspective and kind of use a kind of a heuristic in terms of motivations for why we want to assess and measure impact. And so we call it the 4 A's, which is accountability. So the measurement becomes very important in terms of the evidence, the allocation. So from a funder's perspective, and not only funders, but charities, foundations, etc., the question about optimization, ideally we want to optimize our investments wisely to realize the impact. Okay, ultimately that's the desire. The other A is in terms of advocacy, you know, having the evidence and really advocating in this context, social innovation as a pathway to impact. And then analysis. And I always add in learning. I know it mixes up the 4 A's, but again, that learning and sharing in terms of how we're doing it. So to your point about chasing optimization or desired impact, I will say my premise in the work that I do is designing for impact right at the beginning of any initiative. So kind of that's the North Star. We know it takes a long time. You know, they often quoted it takes 17 years for research to get into impact, but we're really wanting to work together to accelerate to that impact. And then to your point, in reality, what is our reality? So we're looking at those investments in terms of social innovation. We're looking at the grand challenges and those focus areas. And then I call it the pathways. So tracing those pathways along in terms of our efforts, and work we're focusing on now is the relational pathway along with that. So who do we partner with? Who do we collaborate? Who's in our network to move into realizing those outcomes when it comes to improved policies or practices? So this kind of incremental pathway to our North Star, I think, is an approach I use to help us in reality, but kind of challenge us in a provocative way to kind of think about new tools, new measures on how we can get there.
Thank you for that. And Judith, I was actually triggered by the, you know, we know it takes 17 years for research to move from academia to impact. You know, I tend to only use round numbers because that works better in my head. But looking at that, and given what you said about the ways in which you've led this field, particularly in research, you are actually on the front end of these numbers and have been a pioneer in this area in terms of moving academic research around impact measurement into the economic and societal world, which is, I think, something we're all still trying to figure out. You know, I think all of us are passionate about this, and we're all afraid we're going to run down a rabbit hole today. So at the risk of doing that, I would also ask you, talk to us about that shift and why it's so important to move that impact measurement to the economic and societal space, but also from an indicators perspective. I think sometimes we get caught up too much in, I need to be told the indicators as opposed to help me figure out the indicators. So what are your suggestions for folks who need to just understand how to find their indicators to be able to show economic and societal impact?
I think the first argument Catherine delivered already. It's the funders that want you to actually prove that you not only your solution is viable, but also your impact is scalable. That's the main issue, and it concerns the innovators themselves, not just policymakers who want to look at their programs and how they work. So it is really crucial to support social innovators and people active in the field. And I'm talking about a broad range of different innovators. It can be very small neighborhood initiatives to social enterprises, to common enterprises which strongly engage in social innovation. So this is a huge field. And they often struggle really with demonstrating, especially the long-term value convincingly. And that is why we need at least some form of standardized impact measurement tools that really allows, and this is maybe a first answer to your second part of the question, is how can we get there? Because I find it very difficult for the very small initiatives to consider what indicators actually to use, what indicators satisfies funders, investors. So this is always very, very specific. And when we get to the point of, I think we cannot fully standardize impact measurement. I'm way against it, but I will maybe speak later a little bit more about how we even can get there at the meso level, I would say. But I think it's very important, and also concerning policymakers, to really acknowledge that we need that impact measurement, but it cannot be on what we say in German, on the back of the innovators. So they need the support in order to get to that indicator. So it's on us as universities, as researchers, to provide them with indicators where they can choose from. And I think a good example is the German strategy for social innovation and social entrepreneurship, where actually the Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action defined or made explicit that we need robust impact measurement, and that we need to invest money in getting there, and that it cannot be the single innovator or the single small initiative that does it, but it is part of also the public contract, I would say, to help the innovators to get there.
Yeah, and I think this piece about helping our innovators, whether they're inside of an institution or innovator as a community person, is so important. And I'll use that as a beautiful transition, Stuart, to you, because this is where I think we struggle, right? Both from whether you're talking about it from a technology transfer by definition place or a knowledge exchange space, right? There is a struggle to support innovators around social innovation and societal impacts in doing that. So how should we be doing it? What suggestions or advice do you have for supporting innovators? As Judith just perfectly framed, like, this is an issue and we need to deal with it as a CEO and president of an organization that is meant to do that. No pressure, friend, but how do you do that?
So I think the conversation, you've got quite wisely selected a group of different perspectives. And I think within that, there is an inherent challenge. So you look at it from the funder perspective, where you're trying to look, perhaps I'm also aware with academic colleagues, I might use the wrong language, but a system-wide effect, a causal effect, we want to drive this change. But you're also looking at it from a practitioner perspective, an innovator perspective, and how do those two things meet? And so the kind of, not to disagree with that funder perspective, we want to invest in things that we know we're likely to have a good outcome, a good return on that investment. That's one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is the innovator, where they're finding a path, where you've done some research, but you don't quite know what the route to impact is. You might have a good sense that the route to impact is likely to be through a commercial venture or whatever, but actually you're pathfinding, you're exploring. And bringing those two sides together is really, really important. So yes, in the UK, we increasingly encourage academics to think of a pathway to impact, we describe it, where you're encouraged to think, what might this lead to? And that's a really useful exercise to scan ahead. But then life happens. You do get the funding, you do research, the world might change, the environment might change. And although you may be using that as your guide, your pathway, you've still got to explore that pathway. And actually, you've got to try and find where there is the need or how things develop as you anticipate or don't anticipate. And so I think those two perspectives are what we're trying to hold together in this, also system-wide and individual. You know, and you know, the advantage of looking back and the advantage of looking forward all kind of come together in this kind of middle zone. So to ground that in some way, I think having a basket of indicators is really helpful, because you should set off up front thinking, how can we measure if this is going to be successful? But you also need to be able to go, actually, this has taken a slight turn, and we need to be aware of other indicators that we might not have thought of up front, that we need to think about as we develop that sort of route to impact. So I think that combination of thinking up front, being good at sort of rolling forward and thinking about where the potential might be and how you would measure that, but also not be closed-minded to that being the only way that you can measure the impact of this thing, and being open to gathering other indicators and other metrics as you go along. So I think there's one piece there. I think the other thing, just on the timeline that we sort of mentioned, the 17 years, things evolve over that timeline. And actually, there are things over those kind of timeframes that you are, as an innovator, in control of, and other things which are dependent on other people. And so I know from the innovator's perspective, there's a kind of like, actually, what can I actually claim credit for? And what are things that have a link back to what I've done, but I can't with certainty claim exclusive control for those things. So I guess that's my response to those two things, is one these two perspectives, and how do we bring them together? You know, kind of the system-wide or funder view and the individual founder, and the uncertainty of finding that path. And then also that kind of, as things evolve, more actors are necessary for commercial innovations, but particularly for social innovations. For innovations that are going to change society and have a societal impact, require many actors to play a part in having that impact. And so measuring gets difficult in that perspective too. But I'll stop there, and you can come back, or I can clarify, whatever.
Yeah, so as I was listening to you talk, I actually acknowledged that I was having a physiological response to what you were saying, right? Like my breathing was different, my legs started to shake, and I was like, because I was trying to put myself in the seat of those in the audience, right? Who are, because it sounds so overwhelming to, okay, so I have these two perspectives, and I'm supposed to be thinking up here for system change, and there's these things down here, and it became hard, right? When I was listening to you, it became hard. But often what I tell folks is hard as an emotional response. And right as I was able to like recenter myself, so I didn't lose myself in this, you said the basket of indicators is so important at the start. And I immediately took a deep breath and settled. And I was like, yes, okay, we need to know these things are out there, but we don't need to address them right now. What we need to know is this is our starting point. This is our piece of indicators. And so since, you know, Judith kind of pushed this part at you, I feel like you're almost pushing this back at her, right? From an indicators perspective. And so Judith, what is your response to this from a
So if I can just come back on one thing before we go to Judith, just I think that emotional response thing is really important. I think you know, that journey of discovery can be scary or can be exciting. Do you know what I mean? And that kind of not quite sure where this is going to go can be exciting and can be scary. It just depends on which you look at it. So go to Judith, sorry.
Well, I think we want it to be both, right? And that it either stays scary, or if we have the right indicators, Judith, how do we find our right indicators to keep it exciting, and to Catherine's point earlier, to sit in that advocacy and analysis space, and for true system change, which is what we're trying to do, and not get lost in just tracking numbers of things.
From my perspective, I think we do not need to be scared. I mean, you probably all agree with me when we talk about transformative societal change. It's not the single initiative that makes that change. It's a number or clusters of initiatives that follow the same goals that actually lead to societal change or transformative change. So what that actually means for measurement is that we need, in our measurement approaches, move beyond the single initiative. And this is the intersection of what Stuart just described, where do we find that pause before the systemic change and the individual initiative? And from our perspective, it lies in innovation fields, which are sort of in the middle there. So there are initiatives that follow the same reasoning and really want to strive for the same. And what we, this is actually what we tried to do in a recent project, which was funded by the Federal Ministry of Research and Education in Germany. I jointly worked on this with my colleagues from CSI Heidelberg and IFM in Mannheim. And what we did, we first refrained from defining social innovation upfront. So rather, we looked at innovations and had a three-dimensional space, a matrix, I would say, that basically asked for the what. So what is the object of the innovation? It can be tangible, it can be intangible, or anything in between. It asks for the why. So what is your intention you follow with your innovation? And the third one is the how. So what happens during the innovation process? Do we empower people? Do we allow for participation in the innovation process? And this actually allows us on the one hand to account for the dynamics of innovation. Take, for example, blockchain, which actually came into being as a technological innovation. Nowadays, it's largely used for tracking sustainability in value chains. So here we have done, and when we think that further in terms of measurement, we would then come to field-specific impact models. So I do not need to create my own impact model for my own initiative, but I look at, okay, if I'm active in digital learning, we have developed an impact model for digital learning. So either if you provide MOOCs or other forms of digital learning, you can resource your indicators and compare yourself with others using these indicator sets. So it basically, we did that for digital learning, for sharing economy, for assisted living, and that really helps to get these models of middle range that have a certain degree of standardization in them, because I have this set or basket, how Stuart framed it, the basket of indicators. So basically we have three baskets there. The one is the basket that are indicators which can be used for any social innovation. Then we have another basket that is innovation field specific. It's for digital learning or for sharing economy. So I, as an initiative, can go there and say, okay, I'm active in digital learning. So I pick my indicators from that basket. And then we have probably a third basket for initiatives that have additional indicators, which they find relevant, which are not in the baskets yet, which they, of course, can add to that one. So we are highly flexible, and we do not need to be scared because a certain amount of indicators is provided. So this is something that we will make publicly available shortly in order to really help the innovators to get on that path between the high expectation and we must really say that the expectation towards social innovation is so much higher than to innovation per se. Policymakers are expecting that social innovation solve our grand challenges and address these. Never talked about that concerning other forms of innovation. And we need to take that pressure at least partly out of there and really see, let people do their work, let them work. And even if they change only tiny bits in the sum as a total, they change something.
Well, I can't wait to see what you all are publishing. And I'm sure it'll be shared broadly as we all anxiously now wait for the solution. But I want to continue this conversation around frameworks and how to put it together. Because Judith, you said, I almost giggled out loud when you said, because we can be highly flexible. And I was like, oh, are we? Because sometimes it doesn't feel, when you're unsure, or even if you've been doing this for a really long time, it's easy to get set in our ways, right? So there's a lot of seduction and comfort, and we tend to test the same indicators, right? If we're looking at a topical area, which I think is your point, right? Then we know inside of this field are these are these critical things. But when we have the new idea, the disruptive idea, I think we lose sight of that framework for how we got there. So Catherine, I'll actually come to you with this piece around frameworks and extending what Judith is saying here. So from a tactical perspective and using different frameworks for measuring, what are your suggestions on both ends of the spectrum, right? Because I do think there's pause on both sides. People who are just getting started and measuring impact and understanding how to measure impact, but also folks who have been doing it, but need to extend in some way, need to find a new basket. As Judith said, it was that third one of like, it doesn't need to be full. You can put new things in there. I think sometimes we lose sight of how to do that. So suggestions for folks at the beginning and folks at the end from a framework perspective.
Yeah, I will answer the question, Serenity, and then I'm going to see if I have time to pick up on Stuart and Judith's point, because I think they're very interesting. So to answer the question in terms of frameworks, I use and implement frameworks fit for purpose so they align to the mission and the purpose. And why I like frameworks is very practical, is because I want assurance as a practitioner that the frameworks or the measures I'm going to be co-developing, using, or recommended are sound science. I want to make sure with the principle of no harm, okay, that that bad indicators, let's say, don't get recommended. So kind of that no harm principle is always there. And when it comes to assessing impact and measuring it, of course, we're talking very much about positive, but sometimes there can be negative impact anticipated and unanticipated. So that principle of no harm keeps me awake at night, just so you know. So therefore, I always look to the literature in terms of how others are grappling with it. Because of course, we're not on our, just to people who feel alone here and overwhelmed. You're not alone. We're not alone. So we look, I look out to see and the people and who's grappling with the theory and the science. And so I look at those frameworks. And just practically, I'm just going to call out Dr. Karen Benzies, who is, we're doing a commissioning of reviewing social innovation frameworks as they relate to impact and the measures. And that's a body of work, and I'm sure will be shared with this group. So kind of having those kind of syntheses in terms of the science. So check, yeah, these are they're scientifically valid and reliable. Now, when it comes to the practice, and I think this has been picked up, in my experience, practice-based evidence is often ahead. I think, Judith, you talked about this, kind of the third basket, are often ahead sometimes of the research because practically they have to. So picking up the kind of practices from practitioners or examples and interviewing them on the type of indicators they're using are very interesting, because they're probably going to be those leading indicators, practical indicators that people, in the trenches need. So we always interview the practice-based evidence as well. So when it comes to this basket, I call them buckets, but baskets of indicators, I think, is more refined. It is exactly that. So we'll look at a framework and an example. George Kuna has a very extensive framework on those dimensions and those indicators that you can look and kind of do a pick list look. But yeah, having that basket and kind of going, okay, what's common? But they have to be fit for purpose. So and then you're choosing out of those, if your focus is environment or health or social, what fits to your purpose. And then I think Judith is right, is these kind of emerging ones. So I think I'm over my time, so we'll see how things go. And then the other resource, and I can put all this together, I co-founded the International School on Research Impact Assessment, and what that does is practical tools for how you assess it and how you do the fit for purpose, and tools for getting from a framework to actually implementing it in an organization. But I will pick up on just one thing. I'm over time, Serenity, you'll slap my hand. But Judith, what you're talking about, those systems, we do need management systems to help organizations in terms of data, human resources, if we're trying to be transformative. And just highlighting, often that is invisible. So we're trying to highlight those management systems necessary for the scaling.
Before there's something that Catherine said that I want to follow up on, but before I do that, Judith, using your digital learning example that you were talking about in this upcoming publication, just for context, 2 to 3 indicators that sit these were foundational, 2 to 3 indicators in the field, 2 to 3 indicators that you see as emerging. And you don't have to give it all away, right? But this is like the trailer to the movie. So I'm asking for the trailer to the publication. Just what was on this is in the field for digital learning, and this is what's coming. Oh, you're on mute.
I'm still muted. Sorry for that. No, the point is here also what Catherine Wright said. So this was not indicators we were only from a research perspective thinking of, but we developed these with the practitioners actually. So for example, with the digital learning issue, so we have a classical input, output, outcome, other EOOI, now IOOI model. So
a farm song like that too.
Yeah, input, outcome, output, outcome, impact model we are working with. And for example, when it comes to the impact, it's one indicator is the improvement in the efficiency of the learning system. So which you actually can measure. When it comes, we have different levels. So if we look at changes in the relationship between the teacher and the learner, it's the interactions that we look at as one of the metrics. When it comes to individualization of learning experiences, we look at how through digital learning application, the learners can really tailor the learning to their actual needs. So these are all small, tiny indicators, which would be in the basket for the innovations field-specific indicators. When it comes to the overall indicators, it's about, for example, inclusion. To what extent are these learning experiences available for everybody? How are they accessible? And this would also same apply to sharing economy or to assisted living. So as you can see, this is an indicator which applies to all those things. It's same with when we think of ecological impact. So carbon footprint, CO2 emissions would be an issue that would be relevant. It's more important or less important. For example, in digital learning, it's not that important like in sharing economy, but still it has a point, because if we think about service, so that we initiative specific indicators is there's this one social innovation initiative in our neighborhood, which is called Education for Living, which works with children and students who live there for free when they help the children not only in doing their homework, but also having like cultural events and so on and so forth. So they would also add an indicator on the specific relationship then between the students and the children, and how they benefit from given access to, for example, cultural events. So that would then be very initiative specific. Yeah, just to give you some examples.
No, that's helpful because I hear both you and Catherine back to this vein of like, there's no reason to be scared, right? There are frameworks you can use. There's expertise in the field. There's examples that you can start with from a particular place. But Stuart, and again, just because we both sit in this tech transfer knowledge exchange space, I'm gonna kind of reframe this a little bit and it be a little cynical here, because the thing I hear the most is, well, it's not my job to measure impact, right? My job is to commercialize, my job is to scale up. I'm not worried about impact. That's the innovator. Back to this piece about supporting our innovators, right? That's the innovator's problem. Sometimes it's framed as, well, it's not my work. And you alluded to this earlier, right? But I think having this conversation around frameworks and examples to then amplify what you're doing or to give a starting base is important. And I feel the same applies here. Maybe it's not our work in this field. Maybe it isn't our role, but why is it still something I should be concerned about, right? My office, as you know, deeply measures impact. It is a core of what we do, but why should we be doing this? Why should we care? How is it of value to the broader context here?
No, I think that's a really good question. I mean, I'm aware of kind of territorial differences. So in the UK, the metrics and measurement is part of how our funders expect us to work. So there is a kind of, actually, it is our job to do it in the UK, because we've got a system which kind of mandates that kind of measurement, that is looking for that. But that's not just good reason to do it because I'm told to do it. There are other reasons aside that too. I think also, Serenity, you and I live in environments where we're not short of things to do.
Yeah.
There are many demands on our time, many opportunities to progress. And so there is almost a very practical, which is the best thing to spend my time on?
Mhm.
How do I know what to prioritize from all of the possible ideas and innovations that we might drive forward, which is going to have the most benefit? Now, there's again a kind of bundle of reasons why you might choose one project over another, and some of them are very mundane and some of them are very important, but it does play a key role in terms of where should I spend my time, which is the idea that I should invest my time in most because of the impact it's going to have. So I think there's a very pragmatic way of doing that. I think there's also a reason of continuous improvement and learning, by actually understanding how to maximize and optimize that impact is done through the measurement. I think Catherine and Judith said this earlier, that if it's the Drucker comment, that you can improve what you're doing by monitoring what you're doing and thinking about it and moving forward. So I think as well as that, it's a good thing to do because you're told to do it. It helps you to prioritize. It helps you to improve what you're doing. It's difficult, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's a bit scary, and I think also it's wonderful to know there are a plethora of academic frameworks. That can also be a bit scary. And I was quite taken by Catherine's comment about the world of practice is just getting on and doing with things, perhaps before there's the validation and the academic data. And I just plug their communities of practice being really important, because one, they're in that space that Catherine talked about, but two, they are people grappling with these issues, facing the same challenges, and being able to bounce ideas off each other. So I think there are lots of reasons why it's important to do it as a practitioner, but also in doing it, there's a community of people that can help you to think about what you're doing. I think I'd also maybe a bit provocative and say, I'm approaching this, the way that the UK system has evolved, knowledge exchange is all types. And actually it's easy to go, this is not for tech transfer. This is not for economic commercial drivers. And I'd slightly challenge that and say, actually, there are all sorts of social and societal impacts from a company that is seeking to make money out of a product. And actually, we also need to get sharper about that. I know, Serenity, you and I met about a year ago when one of the tech transfer officers in the UK was talking about how they're thinking about their spin-outs relating to the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And actually, most spin-outs are purpose-driven. we are going to solve X, or we are going to try and tackle Y, and they do have a societal impact and benefit, aside from how do we raise investment in order to make this product in order to make a return. There is a societal element to that too. So yeah, I think I've answered your question and probably gone on a bit on other things too, but hopefully that moves the conversation on a bit.
No, it does, because I think the broader piece here is about return on impact versus return on investment, right? And regardless of organization or institution that you're in, things tend to be talked about. That help in prioritization tends to be nudged along from a return on investment perspective, when I tend to craft a case that will happen if you're focused with return on impact instead, right?
Completely. These products, these commercial ideas need a customer. I think also when you look at it through the funder lens, it also brings in what's that job creation side of things and the implications of job creation. So I think it's hard to dissect the two. And actually, we should be thinking of commercially driven innovations as what is their commercial and societal impact, but equally about ideas that have a societal impact, maybe having a harder argument about the economic impact, but actually they may be preventative health measures that are saving money for the system rather than just generating profits for a company. And I think that is also an interesting space to try and think about and to judge these assessments. We every year we have a set of KE awards, of knowledge exchange awards, and a lot of those endeavors were arising from social sciences and humanities to have a benefit in society that probably saves money in other areas. That's incredibly hard to measure and justify, but actually is a very valid and useful thing to be doing. And I say that knowing that Judith and Catherine will probably have all sorts of frameworks and models for how you might engage with that kind of stuff. But I guess my point is that an artificial division of this is a social impact and this is a commercial impact is just that, an artificial division.
Yeah, I can't help but agree. But Judith, you're our resident academic here in this particular area, right? As the applied academic, and this transition that we think had to occur or had to happen or is still trying to happen. From a more about the why we do that, or to Stuart's point, like, it's fake, that's not real, right? That's what we should be working on anyway. But we had talked previously about attribution and contribution, specifically in this work. And I would love for you to talk a little bit, because I intentionally saved this question for last so we couldn't go too far down or get too in the weeds here, because we will. But just so very briefly, from an academic side, just for this conversation around who owns and whose responsibility is it overall, talk about attribution and contribution. You're up on me.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, first of all, I would really love to agree with Stuart, because I see it's the same. Basically, you can't separate these issues from each other. It's all. But I think what is the huge difference between return on investment and return on impact is that the one is basically financial returns relative to costs, and the other one goes beyond these financial metrics. And I think, Stuart, you made the point. When it comes to really the difficulty from a more economic perspective, that is actually in the attribution and contribution, Serenity, as you just said. So unlike financial returns, which can be easily traced to a specific investment, the impact is much more complex. It unfolds over time. It can be co-produced by many actors, and also can be influenced by external factors largely. So it is much more difficult. And the point here is, so from our understanding, the difference between outcome, which is the first stage of impact actually in our view, and impact is that the outcome is a result. It can be positive, negative, and so on, of course. But then I need to ask myself, so what of this effect can I actually, or impact, can I attribute, or is based on my intervention, on my solution, on what I did, and that is basically the attribution. So there is this, so I can contribute with my outcomes to the solving the grand challenges, but whether this contribution is really attributable to my intervention, to my social innovation, is another question. And I find it, I think every social innovator or innovators or groups of initiatives should think about really what can I attribute to my intervention, because it's critical also to really see whether we have intentions when we engage in social innovation. We want to change something, and to see whether this change really happens largely depends on really looking at the impact we generate through our interventions. And that means looking really at the attributed outcome, so the impact. And that also helps us basically to unlearn things. I think this is also an important issue, not to stick with the indicators you have necessarily when you see it goes into the wrong direction, and what was mentioned earlier with learning in the process, and also to unlearn things. So to really, allowing oneself to say, no, we had the totally wrong assumptions. It's good to notice that. It's not good to go further anyway. So, and that really helps when you think about attribution.
Yeah, and I think that's so important, that both things are informative, right? It doesn't make it bad. It's informative, and it's going to change the indicators, and it's going to make it better in the end by acknowledging both. Catherine, I would be fascinated from a funding perspective as we're trying to communicate return on impact. Therefore, we should get the investment, right, through attribution and contribution. How can we leverage that to drive more funding attraction?
Yeah, so I think as Stuart pointed out, when we're talking about our basket, structurally, we structure it that way, but what we're particularly interested in is the intersect between economic and societal. And the reason we're interested in it, when we come to assessment and measurement, we don't want to undervalue it. I think Stuart was kind of alluding to it, nor do we want to overvalue it, as Judith is saying, in terms of effect. But there is there's methodology like outcome mapping, ripple mapping, I think, but it's basically saying there's a ripple effect in our ecosystem. So that intersect between the societal and economic is a very interesting space. And so when we're talking about how do we better demonstrate and communicate our impact, whether it's to funders or donors writ large, it is kind of telling the story through the evidence we have. And as Judith, says, we logically kind of go the inputs, activities, outputs, outcomes, impact. But what I would add is, yes, we want to have the effect. Of course we do. But a lot of the work I do is with very large initiatives, networks, and consortiums. So we're looking at how do you measure the collective effort to the impact, to move it. And we are actually doing research on that. We're calling it the relational pathway, to unpack that. And I think there will be new measures, and happy to bring those forward. But we change our language to contribution, because particularly with grand challenges, transformative, we want to have the assessed effect, but we have to recognize the collective contribution it takes for our ecosystem. And then practically the last thing, in terms of, serenity of being overwhelmed, one practical thing, when, joining the University of Calgary and the work that was going on there in terms of the knowledge to impact unit, in the institution. It is kind of creating what exists in the institution around those basket of indicators. So people had some kind of reference and a tool, and then kind of secondly, making sure the science is behind it. So just wanted to say a very practical way to marshal resources, because, you know, one person can't grapple with all of this, but your institution can have tools like this.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, because I think that, again, the framework there matters of from a what can I do today perspective, right? That is something that can absolutely, that practical tip can absolutely be applied today. Stuart, 2 minutes or less, preferably less, comments around attribution and contribution.
I mean, I think one thing this whole conversation demonstrates is how complex this space is. I think that attribution contribution is a real good example of that. And I think in response to that, words are really important. And it's fascinating having an international conversation. We've kind of picked up basket, bucket, and those kind of things. I think I'm going to go back to the tech transfer knowledge exchange language, because I think we sort of tipped over that. But I think one of the reasons in the UK why we've moved that language on is because exchange demonstrates some of that complexity of contribution, that it isn't as simple as we transfer some technology to you and that's what we've done. It's an acknowledgement that there is back and forth, that many parties are needed in that process. And the technology knowledge is also a sense that actually multiple disciplines can contribute to this. It's not just about the technology. And in my experience, my career has been a component in a system, a transformative system. And actually, if we're going to solve some of the challenges through this kind of space that the world faces, it requires human behavior, societal impact, technological impacts, and that whole breadth of interdisciplinarity to come into play. So I guess in my final parting words, that may be scary, what I've just sort of made the bigger thing, but also hopefully it's inspiring about actually what we're trying to do through taking ideas and innovations and trying to make them have a real world impact that benefit people with no harm, as Catherine would say. Incredibly complex, but incredibly important to try and do.
And I think, you know, we just kind of glossed over it, and I want to come back to it because this is such a critical piece of this, is that it is unique. Measuring for impact, and particularly economic and societal impact, while there are frameworks to support and we're finding commonalities to indicators. Judith, you were quick to re-emphasize, but we're not going to standardize across the board that these are the only of such, right? And I think that is so important, because I hear it a lot. Well, can you just send us what you measure? I'm like, but it may not apply for what you're doing, or for your context, or for this particular innovation, right? So yes, there is a baseline, and there are some frameworks to help. So it's important that there are helpful resources that are out there. You get to build your own path. It's unique to what you're trying, to the problems that you're trying to solve, right? And that it is critical, and that there is this a broader ecosystem of help. And I think, Stuart, you ended it perfectly with, it's not meant to overwhelm. It's meant to show that there's lots of help. Yeah, Judith.
Maybe a final comment on that one. I think we should leave this meeting with a message: you can do it.
Yeah,
So,
that's right.
I think that's quite important. It's not impossible. Also, it's complex, it's difficult, but it is doable.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you all so much for being part of this panel. Thank you for trusting me to just jump in the conversation and letting it see how it goes. I look forward to many more of these conversations with each of you. And Catherine, there's been a reminder to make sure we share the resources that you mentioned. I can follow up with you on that later. But we got in all the questions that were asked through the Q&A. I can't believe we made it. It's 1 o'clock. We didn't go over. We did great. And Rohan, I'll turn it back to you.
Awesome. Thank you everyone for joining us today. And again, a special thank you to our panelists for sharing their knowledge and expertise with us. This was the final session in our Growing Through Social Innovation webinar series, but the conversation doesn't end there. You can watch all the recordings of the previous sessions on our UK Innovate YouTube channel. You can find them on our website as well. And we'll also be sending out a follow-up email after today with a link to today's webinar, as well as a link to all of the previous sessions as well. Thanks again, everyone, for your time and participation, and we look forward to continuing this dialogue with you again at our next webinar. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Everybody.